Hello everyone, Happy New Year and welcome to another episode of SCP Cafe. This is 2019, Week 1. Hope everybody had a Happy New Year. I'm your host, Blue Soul, SCP Wiki moderator, chat operator, subreddit moderator, author, philanthropist, loving husband, and so on. Hope you had a good New Year. I had a pretty good New Year. The weather has gotten absolutely terrible. I was snowed in again yesterday. We had absolutely brutal conditions here. Got down to about 8 degrees Fahrenheit overnight. That was enough to really mess with our roads, and had a nice white knuckle drive into work this morning, only to find out that our heater was out. It was a balmy 53 degrees inside my office. I turned around and went home. So I had some time today and wanted to get started with this week's recap show because there are quite a few to cover, and to be frank, I don't think my voice would hold out if I try to do them all at once. So I'm splitting this recording up over a few days. So if you notice over the course of the week, over the course of the skips that I review, that my voice may change slightly at some point, could very well be because I recorded it over a couple of days. And notably this week, we had the cliche contest kick off. It has gone out of the blocks quick. We have quite a few entrants already, people that wasted no time in getting their entries up. And for the most part, they're pretty good. I think you're in for a good week, albeit it may take a while to get through everything this week because there are more SCPs to review this week than in any other week so far. I kind of expected this, and I had been sort of planning that I would have to do this in a couple of days for a while. I still plan on doing a Best of 2018 show. Not sure when exactly that's going to be. It is going to be sometime in January when time permits that I can record the additional show. One of my resolutions for this year is to be more active in the audiovisual world. That includes, of course, this show, and got some other interests, some things that hopefully as we progress through the year, you'll get to see what I have in mind. And I do hope to write more as well. Starting this recap show, I had a sneaking suspicion that the bug was going to bite again. I have written, I believe, 7 entries that have stayed up on the wiki in about 6 years. That's kind of embarrassing. I haven't quite decided how exactly I want to approach this particular New Year's resolution, but I think it would be cool to potentially double that number. Could I get to 14 by the end of the year? That is something that is, I'm optimistic. The thing, of course, with writing an SCP is finding the balance of things that haven't been done. And if they haven't been done, is it for a good reason? Is it that it's not going to be that interesting a story? Is it going to be that it is too difficult to really capture what you're going for? Or is it just that nobody's thought of it? And hopefully I can find something that nobody's thought of, or nobody's found a way to make compelling and worth a place on our wiki. If you're interested in writing more as well, I encourage you to make use of the resources we have available. We have, of course, the forums on the wiki itself. We have a number of channels on IRC, and there are several, fan and author-run communities out there on Discord, on Reddit. There are no lack of places to get the motivation, to get the feedback, to keep going. I'm also opening up an IRC chat for this podcast. It is on IRC. It is not going to be on Discord. The reasoning's pretty simple. I am not all that thrilled with Discord in a number of ways. That's kind of outside the scope of the pod, but I am going to keep it on IRC, on our SYN IRC network. I am, if you didn't know, an operator of a server that powers that network, so that also gives me some finer control over how exactly things work. So if you want to join, the channel is SCP Cafe. No accent marks or anything. I also want to make mention that on the scp.cafe website, the tagging system is something that I'm going to be making use of throughout the year, and I've already been using it for every article that I've covered. Now, the way that this will work is you can do a tag search for a particular SCP if you were curious about it, or maybe if you wrote it, you can search for it, and it will pull up that episode, and I try to include the times that I get around to reviewing any particular one. So want to make sure that we have these options available for listeners, for writers. My intent, first and foremost, with this show is to provide that recap, the summarized version of what's going on, and let you make the decision if you want to listen, if you want to read it later. But there's also been significant positive feedback from the writers, and I'm flattered, by the way. I've seen a lot of skips. I don't consider myself an expert on what constitutes a good article, but I am willing to share the knowledge that I have in this format, and hopefully it is useful. Hopefully not just for the writers that make it on this show, but the first-time writers, the prospective writers that can hear my opinion for what it's worth on, what works and why it works as well as it does. Getting an idea of what's popular right now and how authors are constructing their works and what they're doing in particular that takes it from okay to good, or from good to great, or in some instances from great to good back in the other direction. That's all useful stuff, and hopefully this is a useful resource for those prospective writers as well. I want to go over some numbers that we got for the end of the year stats for the wiki. We finally broke a significant milestone. We had over 2 million unique readers in December. And that is an all-time high. That's up from 1.8 million back in October. And for the year, when you look at all of the visits we had for the year, there were almost 70 million of them, 69.9 million. We served 788 million pages, 1.7 billion total requests, totaling almost 74 terabytes of data. Not bad. That's a pretty good year from our perspective. So all that said, we've got pretty high hopes going into 2019, and we're going to get started with week 1 of the 2019 skips right now. This is going to be part 1 of probably 3. I fully suspect that covering everything this week is going to take all in almost 5 hours. That's a rough guess. I'm going to be going through these a little bit quicker than in previous episodes. I'm going to be cutting out a couple of things, the comments in the forums, unless they're particularly good, or perhaps something from the author that really gives some deeper explanation into the story. But otherwise, we're going to try to move through these a little bit quicker than in previous weeks. Kicking things off, we have SCP-4172, titled The Artist, and written by Literally Mechanical. I covered Literally Mechanical's last work before this, SCP-4170, on part 1 of the Week 52 podcast last week. That is available, of course, on scp.cafe and our other venues. I encourage you to give that one a read. It was really good. This one, coming off the back of that, what immediately strikes me is that our object class is Euclid, which is struck through, and then it says neutralized. And then we have a significant amount of containment procedures, all of which have been scratched through, and we are left with the bodily remains of SCP-4172 require no extraordinary containment procedures and have been preserved in accordance with standard deceased human anomaly storage protocols. So we're dealing with something of a human nature that is deceased. The skip is described as having been an adult human male, 32 years of age at time of death, and as a Class 1 reality bender, it was capable of performing limited transmutations of small amounts of matter via skin contact. In particular, it allowed it to transform water into India ink at a rate of 10 to 15 milliliters per minute, and it used this ability in its occupation as an artist. And that in any other respect, he was totally indistinguishable. Medical records, however, indicated mood disorders and substance abuse. So it sounds like being a teen or 20-something to me as well. It goes on to say that there's conflicting evidence as to whether or not the skip had telepathic abilities, in particular the ability to command loyalty. However, in the next paragraph, it says that the skip was able to quickly and totally suborn the loyalty of at least one Foundation agent, allowing it to operate undetected by the Foundation at large for a period of at least 6 months. The two paragraphs are sort of at odds with each other, because the first sentence in the first paragraph says there's conflicting evidence as to what, if any, telepathic abilities were possessed by 4172, and then in the next paragraph goes on to say that it was able to quickly and totally telepathically suborn an agent. So, that's it's a little sloppy. Could rework that first sentence in the paragraph, saying basically you could potentially say that prior to incident blah de blah there was conflicting evidence, but after we detected that he was able to coerce some agent into letting him operate as normal, that that's how we were able to find out that it possessed that ability. Now, one thing that I like in the two paragraphs in question is that it does make these sort of back references to how all of our other sort of reality-bending, telepathically capable humanoids behave, that this is a deviation from that, but sort of setting expectations like that normally these psionic humans are megalomaniacal and narcissistic and or potentially building a cult or harems, and it's basically setting these guidelines of what we're used to seeing with psionic humans and contrasting it immediately with this particular SCP. And we're introduced to MTF Zeta Zeta Stardusters. This task force is apparently assigned to be boots on the ground to surveil anomalous individuals that are in that art niche of performance art, subversive theatrical troupes, underground art studios, and other creative spaces that normally can't be infiltrated. So that could potentially be an interesting MTF. I think the way that you've set that up is ripe for further exploration. And the passage goes on to say that we actually figured out the existence of this skip through a financial audit, and that Internal Affairs discovered unexplained financial discrepancies in the personal accounts of a particular MTF agent who was redesignated as a person of interest, and then it was discovered that they were housing and sheltering an anomalous individual. And I am a bit confused by the line that says that after they were designated as a person of interest, and that after they confirmed all this, the POI, the former MTF Zeta Zeta Foxtrot agent, was immediately disavowed by the Foundation. That's kind of vague, and disavowed in this context doesn't mean much to me, particularly when you think about what these MTFs normally have to deal with, that it wouldn't be that unreasonable for an agent to be subverted in some manner. I don't think that we would go the route of permanently severing ties with somebody that must go on, they must undergo some fairly thorough, fairly specialized training to work in an MTF, much less one as tightly defined and scoped as this MTF is. I could see them being, partially amnesticized and then, relocated, transferred to another MTF or to some other way. But the word disavowed, I think, is supposed to hit harder than it is, and I'm not really feeling it. I think there's a other things that you could do, you either, you can punch it up more on how major a transgression it is. But I think more realistically, this is not a major transgression. I think this is an unfortunate reality of what it must sometimes be like to have to deal with anomalous humans. It then goes on to say that an anti-psionic personnel of another MTF, and this is MTF Psi 6, named Sly Dogs, PSLY. They were sent in for retrieval of the POI, and the POI, this former MTF agent, was killed in the confrontation, and the skip was successfully retrieved. We have an audio transcript where there is a door breach, and Psi 6 has, commands both people on the ground, and the POI, the former MTF, says run, go. The skip says who, and POI says go. And we have background audio of 3 gunshots, and the video recording confirms that the POI had drawn a weapon, prompting the MTF to open fire. So that's an interesting little sidelight, that little question mark, that honey, and that they had so thoroughly. Now there's a thought that when let's rewind a couple of paragraphs when we go into telepathic abilities, and that the skip was able to support the loyalty of a Foundation agent. Perhaps that's not really what's going on here. That's an interesting way to do this. I actually, with a little additional thought, I really like the way that they possibly set up those 2 paragraphs on a little further review. The SCP complied, was taken into custody, and after 32 days in containment, self-terminated by transmuting roughly 50 milliliters of blood into India ink within the circulatory system of itself. We have a collapsible that says to input level 2 credentials to access figure 4172-1, and what we are greeted with is an image of a pillowcase with what looks to be India ink in the shape of a heart with some splotches around it, and it reads an article of vetting retrieved from the containment cell of SCP-4172 shortly post-mortem. End article. I was not feeling this until I was able to piece together what was going on at the end. This is good. I wasn't sure where we were going, but I did enjoy this by the time we got to the end. They've done a really good job of introducing enough uncertainty to keep you thinking about this after you're done reading. That was something that I thought was lacking up until that audio log. That log really changes the complexion of the entire work. So I do enjoy this, and the comments are also largely positive. We have a couple that dislike the short length of it. That one in particular wasn't sure that they weren't sure what the piece was supposed to convey, I think, and then we do have some information from the author, so consider this a spoiler if ever there was one. And I'll quote, "This is indeed meant to be a quick character piece, a little vignette about star-crossed lovers torn apart by the Foundation. Part of the challenge I set myself was to write the article in a purely impersonal tone while giving a glimpse into a very personal tragedy. It's entirely possible that my ambitions were a bit too lofty here for that to come across." I disagree. I think, for the most part, people did get this, and I think it was well conveyed without beating you over the head with it. Well done. Moving on now, we have SCP-4880, titled Chewing Gum, written by Mac Warren. And we have an object class of safe and an image on the right-hand side of an ordinary piece of chewing gum in a wrapper. Caption is SCP-4880. Unwrapped. The containment procedures involve it being in a low-security containment locker at Site-98, and that the -1 is to be contained within the area of its location with a security perimeter. And this perimeter is to take the form of a barbed wire fence with 2 guards for maintenance. SCP-4880 is then described as a stack of 10 ordinary chewing gum sticks labeled chewing gum! 4880 doesn't appear physically anomalous other than the effect it has on sapient species on sapient entities and the lack of a nutrition facts label, and that when chewed, the person affected will begin to proclaim how SCP-4880 is an appealing product and how delicious or sweet it is in an attempt to advertise it to others nearby. We have a footnote that says this effect also occurs if the individual is alone. I like that footnote. It gives you a nice little visual there. And apparently they will universally advertise it much the same way, finishing the speech by saying, "Try one now and get chewing before promptly vanishing." And that is a quote from the article, "before promptly vanishing." I don't like the use of promptly in this article. I don't think it is got the right tone. Spontaneously vanishing, sure. Promptly is a little too colloquial for the desired tone here. We cut then to the -1, which is described as a large dilating mass of polymers, plasticizers, and humanoid entities, gross, covered in a thin layer of human saliva, also gross. The -1 was discovered in a steel mill in Norway after a D-class had a tracker placed about its wrist, and we found that it disappeared, and one of the hands on the -1 was wearing this tracker. So you feel like the connection is all of the chewing gum goes somewhere, and it's this big mass of chewing gum and people all stuck together like a really gross fleshy katamari. It goes on to say that the -1 frequently moves parts of the bodies around, and entities that appear are tightly constricted under the layer of saliva and whatnot, and have been shown to undergo labored breathing, and vocalizations can be heard, and it's always either low gurgling noises or continued advertisement of SCP-4880. I like that note. We have an addendum. We have two addendums. The first is a product description found on the chewing gum. I'm guessing this is on the wrapper. And it says, "Get chewing, the new and latest product from Sugar Bomb Confections." And Sugar Bomb Confections is a link to SCP-1921, which is a Herman Fuller's Circus of the Disquieting skip. So there's our connection. They call it chewing gum. And it says, "If you've tried our delicious chocolates," which is linked to SCP-643, "and our other sweet surprises," which is linked to SCP-1517, "you're in for a tasty treat with this. Start the day right with sweet, sweet, sweet gum. And remember, kids, don't forget to brush your teeth." And it's signed Oliver. We have a footnote that says that we are trying to figure out who Oliver is. And we have a second addendum, which is a recovered note from a pile of ash nearby the location of the -1. And the upper portion is burnt with only the lower half readable, and it reads, "I don't care how you get rid of them, just dump it somewhere else, fix it, or else it's your head. Ollie." End article. This does a lot of things in ways that I've seen before. It relies very heavily on these back references to Series 1 and 2 skips. I don't know really how well it stands on its own. I don't like the overly literal descriptions for like when you have a label on an anomalous item, and then that we've got all the exposition provided through a product description. Don't really care for that way of doing business when it comes to articles like this, and without the backlinks, this is not terribly compelling on its own. You have that one kind of cool image, and the rest of it is kind of lacking. When you go through the totality of the skip, you remove any links to other works and force it to stand on its own. I'm not sure how well it does that. And it's not necessarily that there's anything outright wrong with it, but I don't think it's all that strong a piece either. So this is a no vote for me. Needs a little more punch. It needs something to set it apart and give it something to really stick with me, because in this by itself doesn't have terribly much going for it as far as the ones you'll look back on later and say, oh yeah, remember that one? I don't think I'm going to have that with this. You've got the one sort of crazy visual, but then the description and the recovered note feels very Series 1 and not necessarily in a good way. Moving on now, we have SCP-4146, titled A Pound of Flesh on Black. This was written by Gafsy. We have an object class of safe and containment procedures that indicate that it is inherently uncontainable. So Foundation efforts are directed towards suppressing public knowledge about the anomalous effects of 4146. Web crawlers are to keep an eye out for mentions of money, gambling chips, and other objects in combination with mentions of human viscera or remains. And in the event of any awareness being brought to the true nature of the SCP, amnestics may be applied as necessary, and civilians are to be detained and debriefed in order to ascertain the origin of the effects, so the monastic effects that let them be aware, I suppose, of this true nature of things. SCP-4146 is described as a phenomenon affecting all markers of value in gambling taking place in the Chicago metropolitan area, and that during the process of exchange between players, the marker will spontaneously transmutate into a piece of human flesh or viscera of equal weight and approximate size. And these affected markers don't decay like normal flesh. They're otherwise indistinguishable from non-anomalous flesh. And the largest single piece recovered was a femur with attached muscle and skin, substituted for a 12.4 kilogram gold bar. It goes on to say that an estimated 15,800 tons of flesh has been produced by SCP-4146, and the DNA testing has confirmed that all of it is from Chicago Spirit associate Sid Cassidy. We have a picture of Sid Cassidy circa 1926, just to the right of that quote, and a footnote that indicates some backstory on him and that he was last seen in 1928. Chicago Spirit is a GOI that is currently got some tales being written about it. And we determined the existence of SCP-4146 through monastic agents being applied in 1957 by a researcher who then noticed that his wallet was filled with large numbers of scabs, teeth, and a human ear, and the tissue was traced back to his earnings in a neighborhood bingo tournament 2 nights before, and he requested and received voluntary amnesticization of the experience. We've been seeing a lot of these monastics lately, just in the last 3 weeks or so that I've been doing this. This is something that a few years back didn't exist as a concept, so people are doing a lot with it. I think that's really cool. We have an addendum. We're basically going straight from the description into an addendum that mentions that a Chicago Spirit member and Foundation informant was admitted to a hospital, had fever and pain and an unknown object in his abdominal cavity. And there was questioning going on between an agent and this informant. And it asks they're asking who did this to you. And we get some cryptic responses about counting cards and blessings. A girl never skimmed as fast as a water strider. 1 leg too many. Fix 6, 5 mix. Chappie said you took cash and ate it with beans. We have a footnote on Chappie that he would be the leader of the Chicago Spirit, Richard Davis Chappell. This goes on a little ways, very cryptic throughout, and he loses consciousness, and afterwards he was babbling for about another 2 hours and then expired. And the autopsy determined that internal trauma is the cause of death, with bite marks originating in the kidneys working outward. And between 3:30 and 3:33 a.m. on January 15th of 1929, the informant's remains vanished while in Foundation custody, and the reason for this disappearance is unclear. End article. So there's a couple things that I really like here. Just the concept that the entire Chicago metro area, any exchange of currency or value towards betting spontaneously transmutes into human flesh. I like that we have very little explanation of actually why this is happening outside of an interview that's so obscure and cryptic that it's hard to say exactly, if it means anything at all. And we also have the last little bit examination revealed bite marks originated in the kidneys working outward. That conjures up many more questions, and that somewhere in the span of the next morning, the remains vanish. A lot to like here, and it's there's enough mystery, neither challenged nor explored, that you're left with a lot of questions. And this is sort of the flip side of when you are referencing these GOIs and making the work still interesting and compelling enough to stand up on its own. So this is a +1 for me. Don't have to think too terribly hard about that. Everything on it is pretty solid. Don't see much room for improvement with this the way it is currently set up. I personally wouldn't do this interview this way, but that could largely be my lack of creativity towards these things. I never feel really confident in my ability to construct something of this sort that is interesting to the reader. A couple more things that I like about this one: the 15,800 tons of human flesh, all coming from the same person. There's no attempt to explain how or why in the article, and I think that is actually working to its direct benefit, because any explanation, I think, is going to involve such a diversion from where this article was going that it would really screw with the pace of it. And finally, I like the visual here of a wallet full of scabs, teeth, and an ear, and that, the thought of screwing around with some drug to counter some other effect of a different SCP, and having that stare at you when you go to grab some cash out of your wallet. I think that's a really, really cool concept, and all in all, really like this one. This is an easy +1. Moving on, we have SCP-4121. This is titled The Stasis Quo, and it was written by Curiox. First thing you're greeted with is a note by order of the Overseer Council that the following file is level Omega 4121 classified, and failure to enter credentials will result in termination via Berryman Langford Memetic Kill Agent. If that sounds familiar, that's the same verbiage that is used in SCP-001 on the splash for before you can get to any of the posted proposals. You've got the various, input a password, and you need a second password, and that actually makes use of Does the Black Moon Howl, which is a fairly long-running, beaten into the ground almost in-joke at this point. We do eventually get to the item number, a threat level of black, and an object class of Thaumiel, which is struck through, and Hyamal is placed instead. Now, this is one of those esoteric classes that usually gives me pause, because it demands that the article be written in a very precise manner. This one specifies roughly that containing it will lead to an alternative that is far worse. So it is effectively uncontainable. And we're given an image of a circle that is nearly completed, looks to be hand-drawn or painted. It's a white circle on a black background, and then it repeats, and then you have the negative of a black circle on a white background, and these three circles are arranged in a row. We go into the procedures that indicate that 4121 cannot be contained without causing a CK class restructuring scenario or a ZK class reality failure scenario. So public documentation or theories relating to this SCP are to be suppressed, and that's struck through, and it says monitored instead. And that any scientific confirmation of the SCP is to be discredited or suppressed, and individuals responsible for public research into this SCP are to be placed into Foundation employ, or if uncooperative, terminated. And all research into this SCP is to be confined to Site Omega-1. Interesting way to start this. It goes on to say that counteractive efforts targeting the SCP should remain in a partially constructed conceptual stage, and should 4121 experience widespread neutralization, all emergency protocols for affected items should be initiated simultaneously. And emergency order Motus Omega must be fully conceived and initiated, and initiation of this order is to be considered an Alpha 1 priority task. All staff assigned to Site Omega-1 must remain there. MTF Psi 58 immovable objects are to halt any personnel attempting to leave. No attempts at euthanization are to be made. All research divisions of the site are not to collaborate, exchange research, or change division without authorization by the site director. The SCP is described as a space-time impetus paradox affecting the current reality inhabited by the human race, the SCP Foundation, and all associated items of importance. Interesting. So the SCP is a paradox affecting this reality. I like the way that when we tend to get into the weeds on this really esoteric stuff, how we have to word things and what the implications are beyond the wording. We have some clarification that 4121 doesn't affect the entirety of reality, and instead it's localized to specific physical and conceptual items, including organizations, persons or entities of interest, areas and events, and possible changes in the behavior of 4121 are covered in this emergency order we mentioned earlier, and that the SCP causes a causal stasis effect in which certain events can't proceed beyond a certain point in time. And actions affecting certain entities also cannot proceed due to this SCP. And the effect has been both beneficial and harmful to the Foundation, since it served to basically maintain the status quo of things, but it's also prevented the improvement or enhancement or maybe completion of certain containment procedures for a number of other SCPs, and that it's also hindered relations with multiple GOIs, but it's also likely the anomalies had effects on the GOIs themselves, so multiple offensive measures have remained partially constructed, and we have no countermeasures yet due to the skip affecting these ideas upon completing the conceptualization of the countermeasures themselves. So we're at a point where even the emergency order is under a partial conceptual construction so as to avoid it being affected by the anomaly. So when we need to use this emergency order, all of the various pieces of it, which is currently held amongst all the O5 council members, they all kind of come together with their little fragments of it, and we, with that, simultaneously sort of conceptualize this idea so it can proceed. So that's all a bit dense, these ones that tend to get into philosophical things like the ability to complete a thought potentially not happening or being immediately forgotten. They tend to get a bit dense, but so far this is still really readable. So I appreciate that as far as we've gotten. It also goes on to say that 4121 is hypothesized to be affecting termination attempts of multiple SCPs. So we may be trying to answer some questions, some long-standing questions of why certain SCPs haven't been terminated, or perhaps why they appear to be invincible. And they actually go on to describe some of these SCPs having causal invulnerability, and that we now have partially conceptualized termination plans. So this is an interesting sort of world that they've constructed where we're aware of this, and that we are sort of we have to sort of sidestep around working within the confines of this SCP that we're sort of subject to, and we can get most of the way towards a concept or an idea, but we can't complete it for upon risk of potentially losing the whole thing. We go into a discovery log of a Dr. Edwin who was investigating a different skip and had done some independent research to confirm a theory regarding the phenomenon that we're seeing. And there's reference to Area 55, and I feel like that's going to be something regarding 055, the antimemetic keter. And then we have the discovery log continues, where he's just focusing on nothing but the research, even taking it over his actual on-site work. And we have finally sort of confirmation that it all makes sense and that he was right. And from there, we go into addendums that break down a set of hypotheses that are backed up to basically sort of correlate certain SCPs and their attempts at termination or other things that seem to be held up. And there are about 7 of them in here that are mentioned. And if you were thinking 682, you would be onto something. We have the hypothesis that says 682's regenerative capabilities are caused by 4121, and furthermore, the SCP has not been able to permanently breach containment due to 4121. That's the hypothesis, but it does retract the evidence that the hypothesis doesn't take into account the exact nature of the anomalous effects. So, but it does mention like 096, which, of course ends with saying that it should be terminated immediately, but we never get there. So this is an interesting way of explaining away why certain SCPs seem to be frozen in time. It's of course due to the way that we have to write them, but they're trying to give an in-universe explanation for it as well. I think that's really cool. I actually really applaud the effort here. And I think as far as they've gone so far, it actually works reasonably well. We then go into a second addendum, which is a collection noting psychological status of Site Omega-1 and various incidents that have hindered research. So, for example, the first 2 here, the first is a doctor that suffers from minor anxiety through the day and has a foggy memory of the last 3 months of her assignment in the site. She was given 4 days of medical leave, but when she returned, all knowledge of her previous research had been removed from her memory, and additionally, she could no longer conceive of new research related to 4121. We then have a second doctor who reported missing research files, which he then set out to restore. And this doctor noted a sense of deja vu upon reporting this incident. And we read, current status, Dr. Morandi continues to restore his files. Any attempt to remove Dr. Morandi from his causal loop has met with failure. That's a really cool sentence. I think that's some big impact. Just trying to imagine what this site is, how it's actually functioning in a day-to-day. It sounds pretty bad, pretty terrifying right now. We go into a researcher that suffered 15 panic attacks in 8 days, despite having no record of mental illness. And he's expressed that his research can't be finished, and the current status is that attempts to reassign him have met with failure, and attempts to assign medical aid have met with failure, and attempts to self-terminate by the researcher have also met with failure. They're painting a really cool picture here of that this site is in absolute sort of purgatory because it's so devoted to this research of something that seeks to, and maybe seeks isn't the right word, but it causes the total inability to finish researching it. And there are 3 more of these. The final includes the site director and and before I get to that one, the next to last one indicates a sergeant being attempting to euthanize staff members in Site Omega-1, and was successful in eliminating researcher Bell as evident by security footage, but the notes indicate that researcher Bell has currently been euthanized 5 times, and both the sergeant and researcher Bell have been quarantined. Really, really dig what's going on with this addendum. This addendum is doing a ton to lift the rest of this article up. We then go into Addendum 3, which is a report from the Ethics Committee that really just admonishes the site for having such high incidents, staff incidents in the entire Foundation. And Edwin has men and women here rolling a boulder up a hill just to see it roll down, and you just pile more dirt onto the hill. I've been to site redacted. I saw a man feed a child to 682, and I'm more disgusted by this than anything I've seen before. If these experiments had delivered any benefit at all, then maybe, just maybe, I would be inclined to understand. I've seen no progress, and as such my recommendation is simple. Tear it all down. We're financing and enabling torture. There is no excuse. And we finally go into Addendum 4, which is an interview between the director Edwin and the O5 Council. And there's a foreword in this interview that says, this interview was recorded directly following the review of the Ethics Committee member and prior to Director Edwin being directly affected by SCP-4121. We have the O5's shouting down Edwin for what a mess he's made, and the ethics committee's reviewed it, and under any normal circumstances, you would be put to death immediately. But we find it's important that you explain yourself, and Edwin's a little dismissive and says that the ethics committee didn't see the full scope of the importance of the work we're doing, and basically explains that 4121 is dependent on his research, and that without the continued research, anything could happen, and we are left sort of with a cliffhanger that the O5s are, on one hand, they have total avulsion to what they're seeing at this site, and on the other, that the work is fairly important. And we end the article there right after this fourth addendum, and as much as Addendum 2, the series of notes regarding the state of various doctors and researchers lifted this thing up, this fourth addendum, it sort of makes it take a step back. I feel like there could be more of the off-channel of this law going on between the O5s. I'm not totally satisfied with how this ended. I kind of get what's going on. I won't pretend that I have a full understanding of it, but I feel like it is a little underserved by how this ends. The salient quote from Director Edwin is that, think of it this way, there are many anomalies that we cage. Some could doom us all. The human race stands on the edge of a cliff, and many of those anomalies are more than capable of pushing us off. This is different. SCP-4121 is not humanity at the edge of a fall. Humanity is clinging on by its fingers. Without my research, we are at 4121's mercy. We may stay like that forever, or we may fall when we least expect it. I ask you all here now, which would you say is worse? As a whole, I think the fourth addendum could be better, but that doesn't take away that overall this is a really well done skip, particularly when you have these esoteric object classes like Hyamal that have very specific use cases. The bar is set fairly high for pulling it off, and this does. I think this actually does a good job of explaining its object class and making it stand up for having such an esoteric class. The image is not elaborated on at all, so I'm not sure I understand the reason for its placement. It seems to be just sort of art attached to this, so I'm not a big fan of that. I feel like, given what we are going for on the site, I feel like it needs to be directly related. This feels more like an artsy piece that makes this a little too heavy on the narrative when you insert something like that without any sort of explanation for it. But overall, this is a +1 for me. I think that given the challenge of doing something in these really esoteric classes and the ambition of building up this full paradox and all of its ways that it works and trying to explain ways that the wiki works. This was a very ambitious skip, and overall I think it did very well at everything it set out to do. So this is a +1 for me. Moving on, we have SCP-4337, titled D59932, Didn't Die for This Shit, written by Dave U. Fool. We have an object class of Thaumiel struck through and then safe put instead. We have an image of a Bowie knife with 3 crescents sort of on the blade, and we just have a simple caption of SCP-4337 below that, so that appears to be what we're dealing with all in itself. The procedures indicate it should be stored in a standard containment locker, and that testing through Procedure 10-INT may be carried out through an application to the site director, Dr. Liesel Naismith, and explaining how you can get the applications, and that test subjects may only be pulled from available D-class personnel that have been scheduled for termination. And we describe 4337 as a fixed blade combat knife, 38 centimeters in length, and a sand-engraved decal of 3 crescent moons is present on either side of the blade, and that through Procedure 10-INT, 4337 can cause an emailed form letter to appear in the inbox of the surviving participant after 2 hours. Due to the triple crescent motif being analogous to other objects in Foundation custody, including SCP-3319 and SCP-3922, the message is believed to be extra-dimensional in origin. We've seen a few of these triple crescent skips. It's not a proper GOI yet, but I think it is rapidly moving in that direction. We have a recovery log that indicates that the location of the knife was relayed to the Foundation in an email from SCP-2578 Delta on grounds that the object's original owners were senile cultists that had been using the device to make libelous claims. And 2578, I believe, is the skip that sort of kicked off this whole 3 crescent thing, particularly moving through emails. I actually have not read it yet. It is at +187 right now, so probably worth the read. That was also written by Dave U. Fool, so he is building on his own GOI at this point. So nicely done there. I like the backwards connection to your own work when you can get away with it. And that the knife was recovered by agents in a house in Black Box, Missouri. All 3 residents had been shot from orbit by 2578 10 hours prior to discovery, and the bodies had not yet been found by the local authorities. 7 adult corpses were discovered in the basement, and cause of death had been sharp force trauma to the heart. And documents recovered alongside the knife led to the formation of Procedure 10-INT, which is 2 steps. 1 D-class is to be given a question by a second party, and immediately after, the second party is to stab the D-class in the heart. And the resulting message will attempt to answer the question. And we have a test log, and we have D59932, who was in the title, and he is labeled as the participant. The researcher, Paulson, is labeled as the celebrant, so I believe this requires a little bit of back knowledge about this triple crescent to fully understand why these are titled the way they are. And they have a question. It says, how do we neutralize SCP? And we have some black boxes, so potentially reaching into this extra dimensional being asking for guidance. And so I guess we pose this question and stab the D-class in the heart as payment or whatever you would want to call it. And then we have a response, and it is all done in a big block quote. We have the triple crescent, and it says, Dear Paulson /Catherine Kent of Earth 2N. Hello, my name is, and it says field variable, and I'll be handling your support ticket today. And this ticket's case number is, and it has a case number here with an O with a strike through it, like you might see in some Nordic languages. And if you are not in possession of a support ticket beacon, please use the support blade to request one. It says your request has been gleaned and processed from the pre-mortem memories of Black Box, and that's presumably our D class. Here at Triple Crescent, we receive over 50,000 requests an hour, but the Great Weaver keeps us on our toes to answer everyone. Glory to Jalakara. We are, and we have a black box here where you can, the implication from this is that they're filling out little things in a form letter. And it says, we are annoyed to hear about this problem, which can not and should not be solved on your own. So we will consider further action. And suggested actions, we have 3 missing variables, and one that says await instructions. Estimated wait time 400 years, 5 months, 13 days, 5 hours, 10 minutes. And further review of the support ticket may result in, and we have another missing variable, the deceased sacrificial participant, and we have a big black box for our D class, has been relegated to Class H afterlife conditions with an option for appeal hearing in, and we have another missing variable, years. You are watched, you are protected, you are loved. And we have an addendum for the object class that says Thaumiel classification revoked with vehemence. 10 inti testing is heretofore relegated only to low priority questions. Interesting way to end it. And this is from Dr. Naismith at the end. And that's where the article ends. This is a really bizarre but very interesting little skip. Now, it does make mention of 3 other skips that are linked to it. And some of the enjoyment of the work may be lost for not being really familiar with that Triple Crescent backstory, but it's not reliant on it to still make this a good work on its own. This has everything that you need in a standalone skip as well. This has more of a traditional feel of when you're introducing these GOIs. The backstory isn't really needed to get what it's doing. It helps you to know what it is if you have something like an old GOI like the Factory, that when you see their name, if you've been around for a while, you have a vague idea of what's coming. And but if you don't know who they are, the works were still, the ones that have stayed up in the intervening time, were still really good. So that's what I'm reminded of here, that yes, we've got a link to a GOI, but it's not strictly necessary to be all that familiar with the back canon of this GOI for this to still be a good skip. So this is an easy +1 for me as well. Moving on, we have SCP-3592. This is titled Kinder Transport. It was written by Wills. We have an object class of Euclid and procedures that indicate that the location's importance to national transport infrastructure makes permanent containment unfeasible. The long-term efforts focus on information gathering and covert surveillance by MTF Theta-17 sick boys and influencing mundane infrastructural decision-making so as to maintain the site's viability. We have a footnote there that goes into some backstory of a 1973 proposal for the modernization of London transport as it pertains to Liverpool Street Station, and a Foundation operative took part in a discrediting campaign, and the eventual reassessment was that demolishment was impractical. So this is a site that we've been maintaining for quite some time. It goes on to say that during and after an SCP-3592 event, all forms of non-MTF communications to and from Liverpool Street Station should be blocked, and this should continue until localized, airborne, scenario-specific amnestics have been successfully deployed. So something's going on that's so significant that we need to utilize airborne amnestics to suppress knowledge of it. And for the description, we have that SCP-3592 is an anomalous event that has affected Liverpool Street Station's Platform 10 once every 3 years since 1947. And it's comprised of 4 stages. The entire thing totals, 52 minutes. And over the course of the event, all platform activity decreases to 0. And from this point on, agents can no longer gain access to Platform 10. They become confused, disoriented, and suffer from memory loss. And then steam from an unknown source reduces visibility to 0 and disrupts surveillance. And then after that, steam has completely obscured Platform 10. And at that point, you can hear shouts, weeping, and other sounds of distress. Individuals will report feelings of extreme dread and anxiety, particularly individuals between 3 and 15 years of age, even if they do not hear the vocalizations. And after that, the steam clears and mundane activity resumes over the course of 17 minutes, and there's no evidence of any anomalous activity having taken place, and that marks the end of the event. We go into an incident log where 2 agents are posing as civilians on Platform 10 when the 10th recorded 3592 event takes place, and this was the only occasion where Foundation operatives were able to remain at the scene or record from within, and it's thus unknown whether this particular event is indicative of the SCP as a whole. So what we have next is a sort of a chronology of this event done over the course of the 52-minute event. It begins with civilians awaiting the arrival of the 10:15 train leaving the platform, and within about 5 minutes, the number of people waiting around at the platform drops from about 100 people all the way down to 0. And the agent commences video recording via a camera and microphone. And as she's setting this up, her partner, the other agent, walks towards the exit. He's ordered to return, but ignores the command and exits the platform without any further comment. 7 minutes after that, the platform is empty with the exception of this remaining agent. And as she's filming, more and more steam is entering the recording. And by 5 minutes after that, visibility is reduced to 0. Audio is not affected, so what you're left with is a total lack of visibility from this steam and an increasing number of cries and vocalizations of distress. And you can hear the agent expressing audible expressions of fear. The sources of whatever's making the sounds is still hidden in the steam, and there's no attempt from anything within the steam to interact. About 5 minutes after that, the steam clears just enough to allow some visual recording, and manifesting around the edge of the platform. There's about 100 human adults, male and female. These are designated as -A. And their apparel is similar to that of 1930s or 40s continental Europe, and they appear to be unaware of our agent. Another 2 minutes pass, a whistle blows, and the carriage doors of this steam train that has manifested open from within. All of the A instances surge forward. The intensity and volume of these vocalizations increase substantially. And for the next 13 minutes, roughly 200 unaccompanied minors, and these are designated as -M, and they range in age from 2 to 15 years old, start disembarking from this train. Most of them are in a state of distress. They evidence fear and confusion. It says they evidence fear and confusion. I don't think that's the right word. Anyway, we'll move on. It goes on to say that their dress is similar to that of the A instances, so 30s or 40s continental Europe. A instances are searching for specific M instances, so adults looking for children, and upon any success, they take them away from the platform. All these instances are exhibiting extreme emotions. Our agent is attempting to communicate with anyone, but all these instances are unresponsive, and after another 13 minutes, one of these child instances is clutching a small brown suitcase and a crude doll. The agent realizes that this child is paying attention to her, and we have an interview between the agent and this instance, which we've got designated as M1, and they ask for her name, and the conversation switches to Czech, and the agent asks the child, are you traveling alone? Where are your parents? The child says they're still in Czechoslovakia. They're not allowed to leave. And the child indicates that she is 9 years old, and that the doll she's carrying was a present. And there's a little more dialogue, and then we have that the child is scared by screams and sobs further along the platform and cowers against the carriage. She is encouraged to stay close to the agent, and finally says, wait, look, they're here. It's them. And the child breaks away and runs towards two of these A instances, male and female of indeterminate age. They see her, and they likewise start to run towards her. The adult female's legs buckle, but she's held up by other adult instances. The child's picked up by the adult male, who begins to weep, and then presents the child to the female instance, and they're lost in the steam. The agent looks down and notices that the suitcase was left behind. The crowd starts to dissipate. We're seeing more and more of these adults pairing off with one or more of these children, and they're largely not paying any attention at all to our agent at this point. We have, after another 26 minutes, the stage 3 commences, and the steam is building up again. We can no longer see the cries, the vocalizations fade out. We have a whistle blowing that sounds like a steam train pulling away from the station. The whistle starts to fade after another 14 minutes. The steam has cleared completely and the platform is empty. And within another 5 minutes of that, we have the agent that walked off calling out for our agent that just experienced all of that. And then the 11:15 train shows up, and this marks the end of the event. And the suitcase was left behind, and an inventory shows a bunch of clothing from the mid-30s. It includes socks, underwear, vests, dresses, various toiletries, a toy doll, a purse with a monochrome photograph of some adults, 2 coloring books, a pack of seasickness tablets, a Czech to English phrasebook, and identification and travel papers. And it says to see document 3592-D001. And we actually have provided an image of this, and this is a really cool looking aged document. I don't know whether this is something that was created for this skip. If so, that's some real attention to detail. But it appears to be something provided by the UK, and it says that that it's a document of identity issued with approval of His Majesty's government in the UK to help young persons be admitted to the UK for educational purposes under the care of the Inter-Aid Committee for Children. And we've got her name and a date of birth of 27th August 1930, and we have mother and father, and then we have some exposition and some explanation here that this little girl was a passenger on the last Kinder transport train bound from Prague for England, which was turned back on 1939 September the 3rd due to the outbreak of the Second World War. And historical evidence shows that most of the 250 children on board died under Nazi occupation. End article. All in all, this was very good. I feel like there's some room for improvement. I think we spent a little too much time hammering home that this is in the middle of a what would otherwise be a crowded train station. I'm not sure if that really gives us much for this article. It is sort of adding on a second effect that if it wasn't there, I wouldn't miss it. And if it is there, we have to shoehorn in that people, despite this, 52-minute event, somehow get anywhere they needed to go and can't remember how they got there. I feel like that whole bit could probably be removed and not really be missed, honestly. I do really like the dialogue between the agent and the child. It's very natural sounding and very well done. All in all, very good. Doesn't try to do anything too terribly crazy, but that doesn't take away that this was very solidly put together. This is a +1 for me. And with that, we're going to call this a wrap on part 1. We certainly have more to cover this week. I still have another 10 or so that have been written just into Wednesday afternoon. So I suspect there will be a few more after that. So I suspect this week is going to get broken out into 3 parts. So we're going to call this an early Wednesday episode, 2019 week 1, part 1. And we'll see you probably tomorrow. If not, we'll see you on Friday for parts 2 and 3. And until then, have a good one.